So one day, I was just watching YouTube casually, and I saw a new video from Average Trey, who's someone I watch. They make videos on speedrunning a little bit. And it's on Mario Sunshine, which is the best 3D Mario, don't at me. And there was this clip that was really interesting to me.
In speedrunning, and any competitive endeavor for that matter, the top has a shelf life. Not so much in a physical sense where you age out of your prime athletic years, more of a mental aging out. Over time, top-level competition gets increasingly more difficult, which eventually leads to a self-questioning of, is the grind even still enjoyable if I have to put in way more efforts to achieve what I already achieved in the past?
And it got me thinking over the past half a year of Splatoon 3 and going, damn, this game got really hard recently, didn't it? Let's talk about that. I think this most recent era of competitive Splatoon 3 is by far the hardest one that's ever happened. And I want to talk about all the factors that lead to that and why I think it's so significant. So today, we're going to talk about top-level competition, high-level competition, and how those last over the years. Be sure to subscribe if you enjoy, and let's get started. So first off, let's talk about competition. Those of you who have been around for a while probably remember having some era of a top team before. Maybe it was NSTC back in early Splatoon 1, or FT Win when they started their dominance in Splatoon 2, or maybe you're a late Splatoon 2, early Splatoon 3 fan who remembers Starburst. There's plenty of other examples of this, but the trend remains the same. There was usually one team slightly better than everyone else, and then a few other teams who could compete with them. This would compose top level, which would usually be like a maximum of 8 teams. Nowadays, in terms of the amount of teams at the very top of the scene, you have FT Win, Starburst, Jackpot, Alliance Rogue, and honestly, if Crush Soda came back, they'd probably be around there too. And then outside of that, you have other top teams that could potentially win tournaments, like Moonlight, Black Lotus, Nightmare, and the list goes on from there. There has never been this wide an amount of teams at top level, and especially the very top level. There isn't even really an era right now. The closest team you can give it to is Jackpot, and they've lost some of these tournaments too. The point being, there's more teams and good players than there's ever been before. And that means that there's a lot more people you have to be good at practicing against. And that's not even counting tournaments where you play against Japan, which has a whole bunch of other people. But why are there so many teams right now? Well, that has to do with reasons 2 and 3, the scene size and practice. Now, the amount of people in the Splatoon scene has been trending upward slowly, but obviously it goes up and down based off content. For example, at the end of Splatoon 2, when there wasn't a lot of content, there wasn't a whole lot of motivation. Whereas now, we're still getting a steady stream of updates. I'd say what makes it significant now is that the scene hasn't dropped off as much as it usually does after the new game came out. Splatoon 3 has had quite a few events, such as Riptide or the Sendoku Major more recently, that have kept up good viewership numbers even though we're over a year into the game's life. And on top of that, practice is better than ever before. In the olden days of Splatoon 1, there were no low-level tournaments, or no plus servers, or more importantly, no Sendoku. And Sendoku is probably the most efficient change that we've had recently. This is something that you can access in any level, unlike the other things I've mentioned, and allows you to play in a more competitive tournament setting for your practice. Sendoku has allowed people to play with vastly more people than ever before and against those same people without sacrificing the relative skill being even between all of these different players. Because of that, people are practicing more often and more effectively than they did before. And there's even more you could talk about. For example, more top-level players are grinding solo queue, for instance, than ever have before. And because of that, the amount of practice you need to compete at a top level has gone up. And then we look into the game we're playing, with the meta and special interactions. This is also the most diverse meta we've ever had. There was a point in 3.2 Splatoon 2 that was somewhat comparable, but I use somewhat very loosely. It's really nothing compared to this. We've had tournaments that have been won or placed highly by all sorts of weapons, as well as Splatoon 3 just flat out has more weapons, both in general and at the top of the game, than Splatoon 2 ever has. This insane amount of diversity, while nice for ensuring the amount of weapons you can play, means that there is a lot more stuff to learn to play against. Whereas at the end of Splatoon 2, 95% of teams you were fighting were running some combination of 3 to 4 shooters plus some other solid weapon. It's just not the same anymore. On top of that, the special interactions and meta with cooler in general means there is more, well, interaction than before. People are taking fights more frequently, specials have more different ways you can counter or set them up properly, and the ways different teams can coordinate and move is more than ever before. The only thing that's taken away some depth is the map design, and even then, as we get better and better maps and map reworks, that's a problem that's going to go away as well. There's so many more things players need to account for now compared to where we were before. Motivation for events is another big one, mainly the return of LAN tournaments since the COVID era, as well as Nintendo tournaments, like the North American Championship, European, Australian, or World Championships. The increase of in-person and Nintendo tournaments means those people who are more motivated of having something a little bit more than just for fun in order to grind the game actually have those, whereas at the end of Splatoon 2, people were fighting for gold points at best. There's another factor too though, which is skill expression, something FLC talked about a little bit in a stream around the end of 2021.
When you're like just way better than somebody or whatever, so normally like you'd have a 50-50. In Splatoon 1, if you're way better than someone, that goes to like 80-20, and in Splatoon 2, it goes to like 60-40.
So this is a much more vague topic to talk about, but basically I'm talking about the percentage in which better players can influence the game. This is talking about a 1v1 setting. If you have a better player against another one, in Splatoon 1 they were more likely to win than in Splatoon 2. This is because Splatoon 2 had a lot of ways a less skilled player could still turn the tide in a fight. Ink Armor was a prominent example of that, and there's many other reasons for it. But I'm not necessarily here to talk about the 1v1 setting here anyway. I'm talking about that on a larger scale. Think about it in terms of carry potential. In Splatoon 3 compared to 2, you have weapon kits that, on average, are better at doing things than the ones in Splatoon 2. There's very limited specials that can actually invalidate what you're doing for free, and those like Missiles and Whale are weaker than they were in Splatoon 2. The protection specials are more limited in this game in terms of how much they can protect your team than flat-out invincibilities or armor. And of course, there are many more high-potential playmaking specials that users can have. This means that there's a lot higher of an opportunity for a better player to carry the game. The amount of opportunities that you're going to get to make a play that influences the rest of the match are much higher in Splatoon 3 than in Splatoon 2. Maybe not as high as Splatoon 1 with Kraken and quick respawn and damage up and all that stuff, but that's a topic for another time. And honestly, it doesn't really matter what the ratio is in this game. All that's important to know is you can do more as an individual in Splatoon 3 than you could in Splatoon 2. You have more ways to express your skill of movement, special timing, positioning, aim, whatever it might be, than you could in the past. So what makes this significant to me is how fast all of this happened. Obviously, top level has consistently gotten better over time. I mean, go look back at some earlier sets and you'll probably see some mistakes. Have top players watch back their sets from 2 or 3 years ago, and they're gonna see a lot more. The general level of play of a scene goes up over time, and this is even outside of competitive play. C rank at the end of Splatoon 2 is way better than C rank at the beginning of Splatoon 2, and thus is the case for this game. That's part of why rank decay exists. What makes this interesting to me is all of these factors I listed now has made this progress happen a lot faster than ever before. All these things come together to create an environment where competition is harsher than ever, and we're going to have to see who comes out on top. I think a lot of top players, especially on the best of teams, are making adaptations in how much they can play the game, what they're using, and how they use their time in general, more than they have in the past. And I think it's going to create a really interesting era trying to see who comes out on top and how teams develop their own strategies. But I think it's worth noting just how much this difficulty is increasing right now, because honestly I don't think it's going to last. Maybe the game will stop getting content, maybe the meta will become worse, maybe some teams will stop playing the game, who knows? It'll probably still go up, but I think this might be the fastest amount the game gets harder that will happen in a long time. And that leaves it in a pretty interesting spot for the time being. Thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you next time.